Welcome, everybody. Let's just give a good applause to poetry. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this wonderful reading here at Berkeley City College. And we're here to celebrate another college, like way over there on the East Coast, where Maria Mazziotti Gillen teaches, and she has made this a huge at Patterson Community College in Patterson, New Jersey. How is that known in poetry terms? Patterson, New Jersey.
Williams and Allen Ginsberg.
And she's created there a big poetry center and also a literary journal, the Patterson Literary Journal, as well as many classes in terms of creative writing and poetry. And she is here on the West Coast doing many readings, doing a superstar amount of readings here. And it's to celebrate her new book, The Place I Call Home. Maria Mazziotti Gillen has done incredible work in promoting poetry that's very aware of the diversity, the cultural diversity of these states, these United States. Poetry would not have gotten, say 50 years ago, very whitewashed poetry, bringing this all in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. We might feel ourselves a little bit spoiled now, but back then people were on the forefront, and they still are, to get new voices into the canon, into print. Tonight we're celebrating 4 Italian-American poets who have gotten their voices, the Italian-American voice, into poetry. Our first poet is Jennifer Leger-Felgoff, whose work has been published in anthologies and journals and e-zines throughout the United States and Italy. Her books include Coyote Dream Cantos, Where We Grew Up, Second Class Citizen, The Mangia Syndrome, Fishing for Portents. She was nominated in 2012 for a Pushcart Poetry Prize for her poem 50s Flashback. Jennifer owes her Italian-American heritage to her grandparents, Joseph and Clementina Paini. She has served as area coordinator for California Poets in the Schools. This is an absolutely fabulous organization that brings poets into classrooms in California to teach poetry. It's been going on for many, many years, and many poets have their vocation started right there in their classrooms when a CPITS organizer came and started teaching poetry. She also helps to coordinate the Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium reading series and is a member of the Italian American Writers Association. Let's give her a big, warm welcome.
Can you hear me all right? I will try not to do my sibilant S, and it'll be fun watching me move the papers back and forth because I'm old and I don't see very well. We'll experiment. I'm going to do a combination of poetry tonight, some of it, some of my older work, and some of the newer things that I've been writing. I thought I'd start off with sort of an introduction to myself. It's called Shame. Your mother says she's the only woman in the entire community with 2 daughters and 6 sons-in-law. You are a constant embarrassment with your long graying hair, constantly changing address, suspicious political inclinations, odd dietary habits, transient friends. She's ashamed you failed as a farm wife and couldn't keep a good secretarial job for over 30 years like her. During menopause, you took leave of your senses and returned to school, where you sat at a desk like a little child, became a flaky college instructor instead. She's convinced you are destined to wander a purgatory of solitary silence among your overeducated peers, none of whom, she believes, can ever be truly happy. With passive-aggressive persistence, she metastasizes over phone lines, invades your kitchen, criticizing and complaining as she recites your latest offenses, leaving you with an earful of admonitions, obligations, and a migraine or worse. Thank you. Eating at the compulsory feast. He wasn't the spouse you'd have chosen, but when your father, the padrone, insisted, you swallowed your words. An Italian child bride, you performed as expected, cleaned his house, cooked his food, massaged his ego, growing big in the belly. Even in pain, complaint was a language not allowed from your mouth. Laboring beneath your sheet on a bright silver gurney, you held in the screams, resisted the urge to bear down and deliver until the tardy doctor could be called to attend. A terrified nurse kept shoving the infant back up your womb. Later, she talked of God's mysterious ways and tried to starve her mistake. At night, you silently crept from your hospital bed. Secretly, you dripped milk from your frustrated fingers to the lips of your brain-damaged firstborn. For 14 years, you protected and tended this vegetable daughter until puberty pushed her from maturity to death in one violent seizure. Within a year, your aging husband had joined her. Finally, unhitched from your rack of compulsory muteness, you unclenched your jaws and vomited madness. This is my recovering Catholic poem, one of them. Confirmation. Ironically, it's a nun who orders Mother to purchase my first pair of high heels, nylons, the superfluous bra, rubber straitjacket girdle. She tells me the vulnerable priest needs these reminders to adorn my pudgy 12-year-old body so he won't succumb to overwhelming desire. I stare at Sister's drab habit, imagine life beneath black cloth, visualize her Spartan cell, untouched breasts, utilitarian panties. I sit, listen in confusion, ponder threats of hell and her Catholic warnings. Mother gleefully chooses my size 15 tent dress, 2 tones of heifer plaid with immense rhinestone buttons. I sweat toward adulthood within tight elastic. When my turn comes to be confirmed, I stumble forward on command, down the church aisle, dividing our class into isolate genders. Trembling and filled with a devout sense of faith, I kneel before a man wearing skirts, feel him slapping my face. Sex education in the summer of love. It's a warm Central Valley night. You are a 16-year-old Italian Catholic virgin, half undressed and uncomfortably wedged between the bucket seats of your steady boyfriend's blue Mustang. After months of his begging, you finally give in. As he tears his way into your terrified dryness, a drunk careens from the riverbank willows, peers through the windshield, passes out on the car hood. So, This is passion, the romantic act of becoming one, you tell yourself, despite embarrassment, raw, uncomfortable pain. Outside, the homeless bum twitches. You wonder what happens now. All the way home, you feel you've been cheated. I was married to not one, but two Vietnam vets because some of us never learn. And so I have a whole series of Vietnam poems. This is one of them, What He Brought Home. At 1 a.m., he pulls a K-bar knife from beneath the pillow, pushes himself off his mattress, patrols the house perimeter. Silently, he glides down the hallway, checks every window and door. He sleeps lightly since his return from Vietnam, hides a baseball bat, keeps nunchucks under the bed. Ripping at his fingernails, he describes finding staked men left to rot in the jungle heat, each layer of their skin slowly peeled off. He keeps curtains drawn, his back against the wall. Anything can trigger another flashback. Windy rainstorms coupled with sirens, the TV image of a wood-pierced vampire. His bare hands gouge a foxhole into a flower bed within which to hide. Only booze and dope temporarily block vivid memories. Booby traps, ambushes, atrocities. Coma, the silver cross he depends on, repels persistent phantoms overrunning his nights. Domestic violence. He crushes wicker chairs, cracks the glass kitchen table, raises bruises and welts, pulls metal doorknobs from shattered wood. When he commands, your fingers prepare his steroid syringes, plunge a dull needle past rock-hard muscle, ding solid bone. Cancer is the disease of resentment, you said. During the months of chemotherapy, he piled pillows against your writhing body, left you seizing in a closet by yourself. Now you pack and evict his wreckage, trade bodybuilding trophies to redeem and resurrect your old unbroken self. Rehab commencement. You leave behind a crucifix woven of hospital bracelets pinned over your bed. You've packed 2 changes of clothes, a notebook with addresses of outpatient clinics. You wheel your 83-year-old father down a hall to where the broken and barely detoxed await your arrival. Your mother passes convulsing and comatose junkies. You respect their isolate hells, pretend not to notice. You display reluctant witnesses in front row seats, evidence of a family, a job, years without overdosing. After 28 days, you have bottomed out. Practice that first shaky step. Graduate. And to lighten things up, I have a couple for my alter ego, Camille. Art appreciation. Camille purrs and arches her back. The artist, who is also her lover, paints a forest, jungle green circles around swollen breasts. With one finger, he daubs orange over each nipple, sensual bullseyes which harden, welcome his touch. As she stretches cat-like across his sofa, he transforms her into a reclining zebra, streaks her ribcage black and white. Her thighs open like bright blue butterflies, reveal the shocking pink secret inside. Next, ex-husband interviews. Camille hands out maps and smiles at the Concours d'Elegance in Pebble Beach. She has stationed herself between 2 Rolls Royces, near the Porsche pavilion where the richer boys roam. Older trophy wives, now gone to menopause, glare as she flirts with their men. Camille could have her pick of international millionaires, celebrity movie stars, local players. As they examine each sleek classic model, she adjusts her tight t-shirt, licks her wet lips. And my final one is a nature poem. I actually kind of alternate between the tough stuff and nature poetry. Waiting for Resurrection. All night I feel the crackle of impending precipitation. Hips and knees throb, every vertebrae aches. Parched earth and stressed sycamores endure a disappointing dry year, crave rehydration. Dark edges of an overdue squall bubble inland. Puffy thunderheads skid above arid dunes. Excited birds cluster on the half-empty feeder. Brittle cypresses bounce with the first gusts of wind. Thirsting, we await deliverance. Any minute, rainy resurrection just might descend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Our next reader is here from Oakland, Giovanna Capone. She's a writer, a poet, a playwright. She was raised in an Italian-American neighborhood in Mount Vernon, New York, with strong Neapolitan influence that still resonates throughout her life. Her work has appeared widely in various publications in the U.S. and in Canada. Some of them include Bless Me, Father, Stories of Catholic Childhood, Unsettling America, an anthology of contemporary multicultural poetry that was edited by Maria. Wonderful. I just have gone through actually a couple different copies of this anthology, wearing them out literally. Avanti Popolo, Italian-American writers sail beyond Columbus. Queer View Mirror, lesbian and gay short fiction. What I Want From You, an anthology of East Bay lesbian poets. And Fiori, essays by Italian-American lesbians and gays. Giovanna's first play, Her Kiss, was produced in San Francisco by Luna C. Woman's Performance Project. Giovanna lives in Oakland, and she works in the West Oakland Public Library, so you can go and ask for a book. She's also a mixed media collage artist and has exhibited her visual arts in various venues throughout the Bay Area. She's going to be reading from a short story tonight, and it appears in the fall 2012 issue of the Patterson Literary Review. Give her a hand.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to mention that Maria Gillen is the editor of the Patterson Literary Review, which I was lucky enough to get my story in for this fall issue. And I'm going to start with that. I also wanted to thank Laura Ruberto and Sharon and whoever else organized this reading. I'm really happy to be part of it. And it's so good to have Maria Mazziotti Gillen out here. I just love her poetry. So I just had to say that. But I'm going to read, this is basically, it's flash fiction, which is fiction that's very, very short. It's 2.5 pages. And it's timely because it's about a presidential election. This one was the one that Reagan, when Reagan was reelected, which I was going to Google what year that was, and I forgot. I think it was like 1982? 84, okay. It's called Playing with Fire. It's Saturday night, and Nikki's favorite bands are playing at the club downtown. Dead Kennedys, MDC, and Verbal Abuse. The place is jammin'. Dancers crowd the aisles, and the mosh pit's full. Nikki grabs my hand and pulls me through the vibrating bodies to the front. She's dressed to the max in a black leather jacket, army boots, blue jeans torn at the knees, and a red bandana tied around one ankle. Her frazzled gray t-shirt bears the face of an odd half-human on it. Underneath it are two words, destitute freak. She wears this shirt to every concert we go to. Spiked bracelets run down her arms. Her nose ring has a thin chain going from nostril to earlobe. It makes me nervous just to look at it. Her flaming red-orange hair is spiked straight up like her head's on fire. She gave me a few bracelets to wear so I'd feel more a part of things, but I drop her hand and I stand on the sidelines to watch. We're the only female couple in the crowd. She doesn't seem to notice that at all. I stand under two giant amps while Verbal Abuse goes full blast. Why did I pay good money to be screamed at? I could just move back home with my parents. They threw me out a couple of years ago for kissing a girl. The Dead Kennedys and MDC are next. Nikki says it stands for Millions of Dead Cops. Jello Biafra grabs the mic and screams, "All religions make me want to throw up! All religions suck!" Pretty soon, the drummer starts bashing his skins. The mosh pit goes crazy. The dancers are decked out in spiky hair and black leather. I see green tattoos, smiling skulls that say, "No future." Colored mohawks are gelled up like fins. They look like tropical fish in a giant aquarium, shivering and shimmying all zigzag. Nikki is just fearless. She leaps in and out, slamming those 6-foot bald-headed galoots like there's no tomorrow. How the hell did I meet this woman? Our paths crossed 2 months ago, the night Reagan was reelected. The memory is burned into my brain like a tattoo. I had just gotten off work and I was cruising through the UT campus on my bike. It was so quiet I could hear my engine humming. But this was no ordinary evening. A spark was in the air, election night. The fate of kings was about to be decided. As I cruised past the tavern in the student union, I saw cop cars and fire trucks scattered like kids' toys. But this was no make-believe. I heard muffled shouting in the distance. Yeah, the frat boys and the political punks were in the tavern, knocking heads and turning over tables, a continuation of the class war that'd been waging for months. It all started with a letter to the editor of the Daily Texan, the campus newspaper. I knew it because the frat boys eat at Burger King all the time and leave newspapers all over the tables. I work there 5 days a week, but I'm still barely making it. Lately, paying the rent seems to be the sole reason for my existence. Most of these frat boys, they've never worked a day in their life. They just leave their old burger boxes and half-eaten crap everywhere, and I have to wipe it up. 3 weeks ago, there was a hazing death on campus, a 19-year-old who was rushing a local frat house. A punk named Control Rat X was the first to sound the shots of this all-out class war with a scathing letter criticizing the frats, their alcoholic binges, and sadistic rituals. This one freshman died of heart failure during rush week when a couple of rival frat houses were fighting over new members. They forced the new guys to guzzle gallons of cheap beer and run a 3-hour marathon. It ended in a fatality. The Daily Texan wrote a big article about the death, forcing the university chancellor to investigate campus hazing. All hell broke loose on the newspaper editorial page. First, that letter from Control Rat X, which set off the feud. He said he hated the Greeks and their sick community. "Frat boys, you suck. What a bunch of privileged babies. You deserve a kick in the ass." A volley of sniping, hateful letters between the frats and the punks followed, each one worse than the one before. Election night was their big showdown. It was a culmination of weeks of venom, complete with a national arena. Nikki was right there, spiked hair and all. It was a mob scene at the campus tavern. Outside, I could see the TV screen in the bar flashing landslide victories for the Republicans. One state after another was won by Reagan and Bush. Ronnie's smiling mug was everywhere, and the frats were just ecstatic. In a very concrete way, his victory tallied a semester of rivalry in their favor, and they just knew it. They're the sons of Texas oil tycoons and corporate millionaires waiting to inherit their parents' wealth. The frat guys stood on the tables in their polo shirts and plaid shorts, chanting, "Ray gun, ray gun, ray gun." They laughed at the punks. 10 years from now, you skinheads will be working for us. Fascists, the punks screamed back. Nikki was standing on a bar stool, hollering when some drunk frat guy came up and grabbed her ass. She picked up an empty bottle and slammed it over his head. That signaled the point of no return. Pretty soon, fists were flying and tables were turning over. The boys were bashing each other's heads in. In the commotion, Nikki slipped out the back door and calmly walked through the entire student union in her black leather miniskirt and spiked blue mohawk, yanking every fire alarm she could find. She pulled about 15. When I ran into her that night, the place was a beehive. Policemen were shouting into bullhorns. Nikki waltzes right past them and zeroes in on me. She plops down on my motorcycle seat like it's her two-wheeled limousine service. "Get me out of here, will you?" "Who the hell are you?" I can't believe her gall or her getup. Her hair is parakeet blue, gelled straight up. The sides are shaved to the scalp. Her clothes are a confusing combination of leather, silver bracelets, and earrings. Traditional femininity is in there somewhere, but I think she's killing it off. "Listen," she grabs my arm. "Reagan is being reelected. This country is a fascist shithole run by the CIA. If I don't get out of here soon, I'll be spending the night in the cop shop." "What do you need?" she persists. "Money?" "Get off my bike," I say, getting mad. She puts $5 in my hand. "I pulled a fire alarm in there, okay? I passed about 20 frat boys in the process. They'll find me. I'm easy to spot." "You pulled a fire alarm?" I said. "A few," she says. "It's an emergency. Thugs and fascists are running this country, and the next generation is rising fast. Goddamn rich little frat boys. Don't you read the papers?" She looks at me, her blue eyes incredibly intense. "You're nuts," I say. But I know she's right, and I find myself shifting into gear and rolling out of there, past the firemen yanking hoses from their reels, past the cop cars and the guy with the bullhorn evacuating the building. She doesn't tell me where to go, so I drive and drive while she talks and talks, unloading a political tirade and her whole life story in my ears. I watch her now, slam dancing in and out of the crowd. She's incredible. But I wonder, what if there is a future? Does that mean 4 more years of Reagan and Bush? Oh, hell. And what about my life? What about Nikki and me? Do we have a future? Next week, she's going to hitchhike to the D.C. protest to protest the election. I'm staying home to work at Burger King. The rent is due. Fucking Burger King. I'm a prisoner of fast food nation. Why do I care so much about paying my rent? Where's it getting me? I have this one idea in my head. Someday, I'll have a real home, a nice place to live, and a family. But, right now, I'm only 21. Is paying the rent my sole motivation in life? Nikki, she squats in a broken-down house the city ought to condemn. She lives there with a bunch of folks who raise holy hell. But, they have a higher goal, a passion in life. What's my passion? Burger King? Paying the rent on time? Last night, Nikki finished painting her protest T-shirt on my kitchen table. It's a big red circle with a photo of Reagan's smiling face and a big black slash going through it. Who knows when I'm going to see her again? She's a comet speeding through space, leaving her trail of fire. And me, I'm stardust, a golden mist floating in midair. I feel like I should apologize for some of the cursing in that story, but it's part of the local color, I guess. I'm going to read a couple of poems that appeared in an anthology called Mosaics, an anthology of creative writing for seniors. I'm a senior now, over 50. Rush hour in Manhattan for my sister Rose. At 42nd Street and Grand Central, we descend the escalator, joining the mass of humans from every culture. We creep like cattle, moving through dingy tunnels and past metal turnstiles, breathing the smell of urine. Green and blue tiles covered with soot spell out Grand Central Station. At one time, it was a mosaic of splendid design, now covered in thick grime. On the platform, waiting for a train, we see an old lady in a two-tone hat. She sticks her hand out flat and sings in a high falsetto voice, "Help me, I'm hungry." She sounds like Tiny Tim. But there are no tulips here, no ukuleles to strum, only the constant hum of subway cars and the powerful scent of humans. The panicky bleep of a megaphone creaks, "Please stand clear of the platform," right before the number 4 closes its doors and speeds off. A homeless man pushes his way through. One more sardine crammed into the pack. His thick and dusty backpack gets trapped in the doors as the train rushes off, leaving bystanders to gawk. Finally, at street level, we trudge through Little Italy, seeking our ethnicity in a plate of food, familiar to our tongue. We drink red wine in a cafe, sopping up meat sauce with a crust of bread. We linger over coffee and biscotti, feeding the Italian back into us. Then, stuffed to the gills, we pay our bill and leave. Preparing to descend again, I hold my nose and wonder about the ones who actually live under the city streets in the winter and summer. I think of the guy with the dusty backpack and my Neapolitan ancestors 100 years back who fled here by boat to find a better life. Side by side with millions of others, they were herded through Ellis Island, just one part of the human tide, a fabric of intricate design composing this land. They were hungry as hell, and they worked hard to dispel the grip of poverty choking their lives. Even today, rivers of people still rush to this land, rushing to be American. They seek freedom and opportunity, or the chance for upward mobility. It's the age-old struggle for a better life. But some never make it. They get sent back hungry and alone, like the Mexicans called wetbacks, crossing the southwest border only to be deported, return to a life of poverty by this land of opportunity. A few of them get to stay, working gratefully for pennies. America makes good use of its poor. Going home now, we pass the old lady in the two-tone hat. Her hand is still held out flat, and she speaks in a squeaky high voice. Tiny Tim's mother, somebody's mother. Did she ever get something to eat? Do I have time for one more quick one? One more quick one. I write a lot about Italian-American stuff, and also I grew up in New York, although I've been out in California so long now, I can't really say I'm a New Yorker anymore. I'm kind of a hybrid, but somehow the New York atmosphere's left a big stamp on me, so I end up writing about it. Newsflash. Early this morning, a giant salami struck the New York coastline. Amateur cell phone footage shows the salami carving an unpredictable swath through lower Manhattan. Cars and trucks were dragged down the street. Boats in New York Harbor were pulled away from their moorings. The salami wreaked havoc on everything in its path. Powerful aftershocks have been reported as far away as the Cross Bronx Expressway, where debris from the salami managed to clog major arteries in this thoroughfare. 23 pedestrians were seen gagging on gobs of fat. There's no confirmation yet, but the death toll could exceed 600. A salami warning has been extended to all 5 boroughs, including Manhattan. Meanwhile, our meteorologists are working nonstop to bring you the latest information. At this time, forecasts show a major mozzarella gathering on the horizon. The dimensions are still being determined, but residents are cautioned to stay indoors for the next 24 hours and check your Facebook page for updates. Dan, now back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next reader is a veritable Renaissance woman, Sandra M. Gilbert. She is both a creative writer, an incredible poet, and an incredible academic. I first read her, I was first introduced to her work in Susan Gubar's book. They authored it together, The Madwoman in the Attic, back in 1986, maybe? Just right, those Reagan years. I remember them too well. And it meant a lot to me. That book was groundbreaking for me personally. It was also, I know, groundbreaking for many, many women across the United States and across the world. I was a graduate student in France and was having coffee with another student there from North Africa, and she was like, I can't wait to read that book. She was studying translation in English and French, so she was looking for it. I'm going to read Sandra Gilbert. She lives here in Berkeley, and she's author of 8 collections of poetry, which include Emily's Bread, Blood Pressure, Ghost Volcano, Kissing the Bread, new and selected poems, the Italian Collection, and this is a sonnet crown, a sonnet cycle, Aftermath. And and then her belongings, and also her latest book, which is from 2011, Aftermath, which has the sonic crown in it. A few years ago, I heard her read her that sonic crown at Albany Library. Her prose books include her memoir, Wrongful Death, and the cultural study Death's Door, Modern Dying and the Ways We Grieve. She's currently working on a book, so it's very interesting and extremely tasty, The Culinary Imagination, Why and How We Read, Write, Work, and Play with Food in the 21st Century. Does it include recipes? Wonderful. Also, she is the Distinguished Professor of English Emerita at the University of California at Davis. And on top of all of this, and there's many more accomplishments I couldn't even begin to tell you. She's the mother of 3 and the grandchildren of 4. And she divides her time between here, Berkeley, and Paris, France.
I'm so glad to be here in honor of Maria. Maria has been very important to me in my life, and our connection with Italian Americana and Italianita has been extremely precious to me. So it is just a joy and an honor, and I do thank you for asking me to be here. Maria and I also have in common our deep, deep admiration for our late beloved poet, Ruth Stone. So, but I want to dedicate this reading to Maria. I'm going to read from one book that was mentioned, that Sharon mentioned. It's a chapbook that contains all my poems about being Italian American. My middle name is Mortola. You would pronounce it properly Mortola, but in America I was always called Mortola. It is the name of my father, who was French, Italian, and Russian. So I was sort of 1/4 Ligurian on his side, and on my mother's side, 50% Sicilian. So I have always been obsessed with my Italianità and my feelings about it, which were mixed. So I would say, in fact, that the first truly serious, sincere poem that I ever wrote in my life, I wrote a long time ago. It was in my first book, and it's in this book, which, by the way, I have some copies for sale in case people are interested in it. It's a little book, so you can just stick it in your pocket. This poem is called Mafioso. I used to not be able to watch, I have to be frank, The Godfather. I would go out of, my family said it's, one of the greatest movies ever made, but I would walk out of the room and throw a Diet Coke at somebody's head and dump the popcorn all over the floor. I still have tried to watch it. I understand that it's good. I understand the man who made it. It's a paisan, but I still can't stand it. I can't stand the thought that because we are Italians, it is assumed that we are somehow mafiosi. I can't stand. I actually got hooked on The Sopranos at one point, but I was angry at myself. So this very, very authentic poem is called Mafioso. Frank Costello eating spaghetti in a cell at San Quentin. Lucky Luciano mixing up a mess of bullets and calling for Parmesan cheese. Al Capone baking a sawed-off shotgun into a huge lasagna. Are you my uncles, my only uncles? Oh, mafiosi, bad uncles of the barren cliffs of Sicily. Was it only you that they transported in barrels like pure olive oil across the Atlantic? Was it only you who got out at Ellis Island with black scarves on your heads and cheap cigars and no English and a dozen children? No carts were waiting, gallant with paint. No little donkeys plumed like the dreams of peacocks. Only the evil eyes of 1,000 buildings stared across at the echoing debarkation center, making it seem so much smaller than a piazza. The lives of the immigrants of my mother's family, in particular, were very, very difficult. Oh, I haven't finished the poem. Wait, making it seem so much smaller than a piazza. Only a half-dozen Puritan millionaires stood on the wharf in the wind colder than the impossible snows of the Abruzzi, ready with country clubs and dynamos to grind the organs out of you. Isn't it interesting that I repressed the political part of that poem? That's right. I think it's my interest in food and in the culinary imagination comes from that same desire to imagine giant salamis taking over Manhattan. We share that, we Italian Americans. I'll read. But my Italian heritage was very mysterious to me. And this is another very, very early poem that I wrote about my Sicilian grandmother, whom I never met. I was told that she was a midwife, that she was sent from her little town called Sambuco Zabut to the University of Palermo to study midwifery, which was very unusual for someone at the turn of the century. She went to the university, though they were very poor. And she was a mystery to me. So in this poem, I dream of her. This is a poem called The Grandmother Dream. My Sicilian grandmother, whom I've never met. My Sicilian grandmother, the midwife, who died 40 years ago, appears in my bedroom. She's sitting on the edge of my bed. At her feet, a shabby black bag. And she speaks a tangled river of Italian. Her Sicilian words flow out like a dark fish, slippery and cold. Her words stare at me with blank eyes. I see that she's young, younger than I am. I see her black hair gleam like tar as she draws from her small black midwife's bag her midwife tools, heavy silver instruments, polished like doorknobs, polished, misshapen, peculiar, like the knobs of an invisible door. And this is a poem about my grandfather, who was my paternal grandfather, he was called Frenchy in America, but he was ultimately Ligurian. His family came from Genoa. And he used to make, maybe this inspires me to write about food too, the most extraordinary stuffing for our Thanksgiving turkeys. I didn't understand where this could have come from. It was made with spinach, breadcrumbs, Parmesan cheese, mushrooms, lots of garlic. If you know Ligurian food, you know that that is a truly Genovese recipe. But I didn't know it as a kid. Anyway, he came to this country saying that he wanted to study art. He came from Paris and Nice at the turn of the century to study painting in America. Now, when you consider that Picasso and Gertrude Stein and all those people were doing amazing things in Paris, you have to think that he got something wrong. It's like that line from Casablanca, you know, what brought you to Casablanca, Rick? I came to take the waters. Waters, Rick, in Casablanca? I was misinformed. My grandfather was misinformed. He became a restaurateur. Restaurant went bankrupt. Another immigrant story. Grandpa. Garlic and cigars recall you. Stuffed mushrooms, spinach, ravioli, Genoa haunting your kitchen, and you with your dragging foot, bad circulation, maybe a stroke, 5'3", bald, gray forehead, gray mustache, failed restaurateur, failed painter, thinning as you cooked, thinning to the one you were in the bottle green Hotel Negresco uniform in Nice. Only now in Queens, pining for the old farm, the hills above the sea. When they passed the cobbled wharf at Genoa, planning their moves 5 centuries ago, what did they imagine? The men must have been seamen, leaning landward like old walls. They must have dreamed of you as a wave breaking on some far island. You must have been their intention for the future. When the great ship set sail, heeling and running free, you lay in the hold, naked of uniforms, painter of frescoes, master of promised spices, rosy, perfect. What accident of the mid-Atlantic turned you into a scrap of cargo, lost by the civilization of the wind, the calm sea, the prosperous voyage that left you and your dragging foot behind? Here's a poem about growing up in Queens. I recognize another New Yorker here. We lived in Jackson Heights. My mother went out of her way to leave the Sicilian ghetto in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, that was so full of richness and delicious food, to move to this sort of sterile apartment building in Queens. So when I wrote about Jackson Heights, I naturally wrote about it in a sonnet. I don't know how many of you know Queens. How many people have ever heard of this place called Jackson Heights? Jackson Heights is a part of Queens. It's rather near Manhattan by subway, but it's not Greenwich Village. It's not Little Italy. Jackson Heights. Red brick, gold brick, trim colonial white. The apartment palaces rose for miles along the shady avenues of Jackson Heights. Their hedges firm, their names a wasp song. The Colton, the Buckingham, the Ivy Leaf. Their lobbies, stage sets of gentility, sofas and chairs a little larger than life, as if arranged for a giant tea party. At 15, I knew this was making it. Each day, thank God for Queens, my mother said. Sicily was what she tried to forget. The stony village, the farmyard, the donkey shit. Then why did my Spanish boyfriend kiss my ear and murmur sexually, "How can you live here?" Question I often ask myself. I think I'll read 2 more poems. This is a poem called The Summer Kitchen, which is was the title of another chapbook I published, and it's about a summer kitchen that my aunt, who lived in Williamsburg, had in her house. It was incredibly mysterious to me. You have to understand, there I was in Jackson Heights. She lived in a brownstone house with a wonderful floor-through kitchen upstairs, and then downstairs, this amazing summer kitchen where they moved all the culinary operations of the household in the summertime, obviously, to be cooler. And outside, there was a wonderful little garden. So I don't think there's anything else I need to tell you. The summer kitchen. In June, when the Brooklyn garden boiled with blossom, when leaflets of basil lined the paths and new green fruitless fingers of vine climbed the airy arbor roof, my Sicilian aunts withdrew to the summer kitchen, the white, bare, secret room at the bottom of the house. Outside, in the upper world, sun blistered the bricks of the tiny imitation Taormina terrace where fierce socialisty uncles chain-smoked camels and plotted politics. Nieces and nephews tussled among thorny, blood-colored American roses. A pimply concrete bird bath fountain dribbled ineffectual water, warm as olive oil. Cool and below it all, my aunts labored among great cauldrons in the spicy air of the summer kitchen. In one kettle, tomatoes bloomed into sauce. In another, ivory pasta leaped and swam. On the clean white table at the center of the room, heads of lettuce flung themselves open, and black-green poles of zucchini fell into slices of yellow like fairy tale money. Skinning around the white sink in one corner, the trout that Uncle Christopher brought back from the Adirondacks gave up the glitter of its fins to the glitter of Zia Francesca's powerful knife. Every August day, Zia Petrina rose at 4 to tend the morning. Smoky Greek chignon drawn sleek, she stood at the sink. Her quick shears flashed in the silence, separating day from night, trunk from branch, leaf from shadow. As the damp New World sun rays struggled to rise past sooty housetops, she'd look suddenly up with eyes black as the grapes that fattened in the arbor. Through one dirt-streaked window high above her, she could see the ledge of soil where her pansies and geraniums anchored. Higher still, in tangles of heat, my uncle's simmering garden grew, like green steam swelling from the cool root of her kitchen. Thanks so much. I think I'll end with a short poem dedicated to my late husband. He was, his family was Jewish. They came from Russia and Poland to this country around the same time that my family came from Sicily and France and Russia. And my grandfather was a tailor, and so was his grandfather, a tailor. They came to this country, and they were both tailors. Needless to say, they never knew each other, but in the end, we did know each other, and we got married and had 3 children and 4 grandchildren. And this is in memory of him. This is called Tailors. My grandfather, the tailor, sat in his little dark shop, sewing me together. Twice a day, my Sicilian grandmother brought him platefuls of praise, like bowls of spaghetti. My other grandmother, the seamstress, basted and hemmed. Her needle traced strange Russian characters on the rough cloth. Your grandfather, the tailor, lengthened you imperceptibly. He lovingly made you a beard and a talus. And in the sultry sweatshops of the Lower East Side, where summer swelled like a giant cabbage, hundreds and hundreds of great aunts hunched over glittering machines in the heavy weather, crooning and clucking and weeping and gossiping and stitching together the sidewalks that would stitch us together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I'd like to just remind people we're going to come up with our most honored reader tonight, who has traveled many, 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 many miles to come read specifically for us. But we also have books outside after the reading. There's some on sale from our bookstore, and Sandra also has some for sale too. If you're interested, go support local writers and bookstores. Ask for signature, ask for your book to be signed. Nothing more meaningful, not only a book of poetry, but a book of poetry signed by the author. Okay, so now we come to Maria Mazziati Gillen. She is a recipient of the 2011 Barnes & Noble's Writers Award from Poets and Writers, and the 2008 American Book Award for her book, All That Lies Between Us. She has many, many awards, many honors, etc. But I will let you know that some of the titles of her book, her latest book that just came out is called The Place That I Call Home by New York Quarterly Books. She's also the founding executive director of the Poetry Center at Passaic County Community College in Paterson, New Jersey, and the editor of the Paterson Literary Journal, with Giovanni read from. She also teaches at another college. She's a director of the Creative Writing Program and professor of poetry at Binghamton University at SUNY, State University of New York. And she has published 14 books of poetry, including What We Pass On, The Weather of Old Seasons, Where I Come From, Things My Mother Told Me, and I like this one the best, Italian Women in Black Dresses. With her daughter, Jennifer, she has co-edited 4 anthologies, including the one that I mentioned, Unsettling America, as well as Identity Lessons, Growing Up Ethnic in America, and Italian-American Writers on New Jersey. So she has read worldwide her work, and including at the Geraldine Dodge Poetry Festival. This is a huge festival in the East Coast. Tremendous. So let's give this award.
Steps. I'd like to be 20 again. There are days, at least, where I'd like to be 20 again. I don't want to suffer that way anymore, though. I'm going to start with a poem called My Mother's 1950s Refrigerator. My mother had this 1950s refrigerator, the kind with the small freezer built inside, where the ice would build up like stalagmites, and the motor would whir when it signaled that the temperature inside was going up. My mother earned her living with a needle. Sometimes we'd play around her when she sewed in the old brown rocker, the basting threads piling like clouds around her. We pretended we were jumping off cliffs when we'd climb on the arm of the sofa and jump off, though we'd jump quietly so she wouldn't know, because children were supposed to be seen and not heard. The 25 cents an hour she earned provided the pennies she'd give us to buy cones at Burke's ice cream parlor. I think sometimes of the cartons of blueberries I buy at $3.95 a pint. And I remember my mother's refrigerator that was always full of homemade food: bread, meatballs, braciole, spinach, broccoli adaba, but no blueberries. That small berry I didn't taste until I was a grown woman myself. And I imagine my mother's horror at the thought of her spoiled daughter paying $3.95 a pint for blueberries just because she wants them. I was just interviewed on a program, and the man made me realize that I write a lot about shame and a lot about looking for a place of safety or a place to call home. And I want to read this poem about my mother called The Little General. And this is what my brother called her when when we were growing up. And it strikes me as very funny because recently my daughter said, you know, I always do what everybody wants me to do. And then I'm annoyed at myself because I don't stand up to people. Well, I didn't stand up to people until I was 40, so perhaps she still has time to stand up to people. But she said, it's because you're bossy. You're so bossy. I'm used to paying attention to what you say, and so when somebody tells me to do something, I do it. I was horrified because I don't think of myself as particularly bossy, but I guess I really am. The little general. My brother called our mother the little general when we were teenagers, my brother driving the car. My mother sitting next to him, her head a small dark knob, barely reaching the top of the seat. My bossy mother who told us how to live our lives. My mother who was always moving. When I remember her, I see her almost as a blur, like the cartoon of the Roadrunner. My mother who washed all the dishes as soon as the last bite of food vanished from the plate. My mother who held my doctor brother's foot until he fell asleep when he was still a boy. My mother who sat at the kitchen table with us, always ready to hear the stories of our lives, ready to tell the stories of hers. My mother who told me everything that was wrong with me, so I still hear her voice, though she said she told me for my own good. My mother who loved the feel of the earth on her hands, who smelled the flour and spices, who baked thousands of loaves of bread, cooked innumerable fragrant meals for her children and grandchildren in her basement kitchen. My mother who taught me how to laugh. My mother who could not read or write. And though she wanted to go to school, my father wouldn't let her. Women don't need to go to school, he said. My mother who did not know how much money my father had in the bank and never wrote a check. My mother who wanted to learn how to do everything. My mother who could quote poems she memorized in 3rd grade in Italy before she had to leave school. My mother who drew an imaginary line around us to keep us close. The front stoop, our boundary, the family, our country. Her little sturdy body better than any magic charm. My mother, whose skin turned orange before she died, though the week before she got sick, she planted a huge garden. We were sure she was too powerful to die. Ma, even now, 20 years after the funeral procession led us to Calvary Cemetery and to the mausoleum drawer they filed you in. I wish I could drive over to your house and find you there, your earthy humor, your warm arms that always were the place I called home. And let's see. You know, when you have a new book, the problem with a new book is that you get confused about where things are. And I'd like to read a poem about my husband had early onset Parkinson's disease, and if you know anything about that disease, it's a very long process of losing various things that you could do before but can't do now. This is called the Cedar Keepsake Box. What happened to the Cedar Keepsake Box my mother bought me the only time we ever went to the Jersey Shore when I was growing up? After she told me that I couldn't have it, too expensive, my mother bought it for me anyway. Here, she said, and turned away. My mother who loved us with a devotion so complete we could have been saints or gods to her. I loved that box, loved the aroma of cedar rising out of it when I opened it, loved the feel of the burnished wood under my fingers, the box that would keep my tender secrets for years. So much of our lives is like that. We love and love and love an object, and then one day it disappears. And we don't notice, as though there were a canyon in the middle of the world where all those lost loves go. It is like that with people too. So now when I hear your voice on the phone, that trembling, rasping it has become, or when you tell me you fell 4 times today and describe each place where you fell, or when you fumble for words to explain some simple fact, I know you too are going to vanish from my life. The smooth feel of your skin under my hand, the way your shaking hands reach for me. The same way I still remember the sweet smell of cedar lifting in the air, the smooth feel of that wooden box under my hand. Okay, and I want to read. One of the things I think when you have somebody who has a very long period of illness is that as the person loses more and more things that they can do, you lose more and more things as well. It's not only the person who loses them, but that these little pieces of your relationship disintegrate as well. And so that's part of it. I've been writing a lot of poems about that. And I want to write a poem. I was driving into New York to go go read at a school, a private school. I never know why they ask me to these things because I'm such a lower class person. But anyway, that they asked me to this very fancy school. I conjure you up. This morning, I drove away from home, leaving Dennis behind. Dennis, who suddenly is sure that a troop of Boy Scouts or soldiers marched through the house, certain that our daughter Jennifer, who was in Cambridge, took him to the doctor's office. Dennis, who was mumbling to people none of us can see. I'm in Star Wars, he said. I'm on a trip. His eyes are fogged over and lost. Dennis, I say, Dennis, do you know who I am? Then his eyes clear for a minute, and he says, you think I'm crazy. Then they cloud over again. This morning, I drive into sunlight and away from the Jamaican woman who takes care of Dennis when I'm gone, as I am so often. I drive into Manhattan, down 68th Street, past sun-dappled brick and brownstone, past city trees, and to this school where for a while I leave behind the man I love and married so many years ago, who soon won't know who I am. This poem is self-explanatory. A poem about a turnip. I could write a poem about a turnip or a sweet potato, but what good would it do? My ex-son-in-law, the one who hurt my daughter so badly, I don't know if she'll ever recover, served me turnips once. I hated them, so white and bland and difficult to swallow, like his betrayal, his words, I've met someone else, I want a divorce. I imagine my daughter standing in their small apartment, her face shock silent, her eyes filling with tears. You're beautiful, he tells her. You'll find someone else. She comes home to me, walks into my arms, and sobs. We spend that entire weekend crying, though I try to hide my tears from her, even as she soaks my shirt with her own. I'd hit my ex-son-in-law in the head with a turnip or a really big, uncooked sweet potato if I could. I think of my daughter so distraught that year she drove into the back of her friend's car, that she tells me she dreamt Paul was in bed with her, dreamt he had come back, and then he changed his mind and vanished, and she woke up silently. We were together 11 years, she tells me, 11 years. And then she starts to pretend it doesn't matter, pretend it never happened, pretend she is happy being alone. Whenever I think of turnips, I think of him, the mask he wore around us that made us believe he was my son. The letters he wrote to me after they divorced, saying he wanted to be my friend. The way he shook off their 11 years together and went on with his life. Behind his handsome face, his loving smiles, there hid another face, ugly and unfeeling as the turnips he served so proudly. And I have a son who's a lawyer and who really probably can't stand me. I think I drive him insane. And somebody said to me recently, well, maybe you drive him insane because it's the way your mother drove you insane for a long period of time. And I thought, well, that may very well be. But I think that he's more like me than he ever wants to admit. And that he wants to think that he's very different from me, and he certainly is politically completely different from me. When I speak sometimes, I hear my mother's voice, though she's been gone 20 years. I can't resist taking care of the world, I who find myself giving unasked for advice like my mother. I who sometimes think I can do everything, know everything. Remember how annoyed I was when my mother would tell me what I was doing wrong and why her way was better than mine. Become her when I give my son advice he doesn't want or need. My son, although he doesn't know it, now is me, the one who takes care of everything, the one his family goes to for advice and comfort. My son, who takes his 19-year-old daughter out for long rides so they can talk, who tells her, you shouldn't let any boy treat you that way. You deserve to be treated like a princess. My son, who despite a busy week in his law firm, a week in which he traveled to California and back in the same day so he wouldn't be away from his family. My son, who spent so many weekends this year backpacking up a mountain with his son and the Boy Scout troop, sleeping in a tent. My son, whom I so annoy. My son, who is just like me, though he would deny it and refuses to recognize when he speaks, sometimes it is my voice he hears. But not making those arch-conservative statements, it isn't. I have no idea what time it is. All right, I'm going to read a poem about my grandson called The Boys Call My Grandson Names. I carry my grandson's picture in my wallet now, as though by carrying him with me, I could make the boys in his junior high stop calling him names. In the picture, he has his arms folded across his chest, as though that would prevent people from noticing the weight he's gained. In the same way, I wear black, hoping that I will hide the obvious fact that I am no longer 104 pounds. His mother tells me that often when she picks him up from his new school in Texas, he is crying. His best friend from North Carolina still calls him every week. They spend an hour on the phone together, and I hear in his voice how happy he is when he talks to him, how words spill over themselves. When he hangs up, he goes to his room and does not come out for an hour. I know that for the rest of his life, he will remember the names those boys call him. The names he is too ashamed to repeat to his mother and father. Though he asked him, what is it, what is it? He refuses to say. I think of those wood-burning kits you can use to burn a name on a cabin or a door. And I know the names they called him are burned in his memory in letters as thick and dark as any you could hang on a door. And he will carry those voices with him even when he is old and has lived his life. The way we all remember the first time other children pointed at us and laughed, and the loneliness of a junior high field where no one picks you for a team or calls you friend. And Sandra, hearing you write, I've written so much about food. I can't tell you. I think it must be a compulsion of all Italians to write as much about food as possible. And I associate so much with we didn't have what I would call a summer kitchen. We had a kitchen in the basement that my mother cooked everything in the kitchen in the basement. And upstairs, we had this kitchen that was never touched. Never. No, unless like a doctor came. And then, not her son, the doctor, but another doctor came. She might make him a cup of coffee in the upstairs kitchen. Other than that, we had 3 tables end to end in this basement kitchen. And my mother cooked the most amazing meals in that kitchen. And it was really heavenly, and I used to take my children there after school, and my husband wanted American food, so we would first go to my mother's, and she would always have 10,000 things she'd pull out of the refrigerator. And I don't have anything to give you, and she'd take out a 3,000 course meal, and we would have this meal, and then we would go home, and I'd cook for my husband, and my children didn't want that. They wanted my mother's food, and my husband was the only one who really wanted the more American food. I hope I'm not insulting Americans here by saying that, but my mother was an amazing cook, and it was something that was very important to us. It was part of the way this family stayed together, those Sunday dinners. And I will tell you another thing. My daughter is a professor and an English professor, but she's now started writing about media and television studies. But she also has written some memoir pieces, and she's written some wonderful memoir pieces about my mother and that going there after school and the food and the way my mother kind of opened up a whole world to them. Even though I think I know what you mean when you say it's complicated, the feelings that we had. There were so many times when I was ashamed, when I was so glad to get this American, what I thought was an American name. I was too stupid to realize that being Irish did not necessarily mean that you were an American. But I was so glad to get rid of Mazziotti, which nobody could ever say or spell, and which made me feel as though I had a gigantic sign on the back of my head that said, Italian, Italian. And then when I was in my 40s, I took it back, and I thought, if you don't like my name, to hell with you all. And in fact, I think I'm going to read a poem about that, about taking back my name. And it's called Growing Up Italian. When I was a little girl, I thought everyone was Italian, and that was good. We visited our aunts and uncles, and they visited us. The Italian language smooth and sweet in my mouth. In kindergarten, English words fell on me thick and sharp as hail. I grew silent, the Italian word balanced on the edge of my tongue, and the English word lost during the first moment of every question. It did not take me long to learn that dark-skinned people were greasy and dirty. Poor children were even dirtier. To be dark-skinned and poor was to be dirtiest of all. Almost every day, Mr. Landgraf called Joey a spaghetti bender. I knew that was bad. I tried to hide by folding my hands neatly on my desk and being a good girl. Judy, one of the girls in my class, had honey blonde hair and blue eyes. All the boys liked her. Her parents and grandparents were born in America. They owned a local tavern. When Judy's mother went downtown, she brought back coloring books and candy. When my mother went downtown, she brought back one small brown bag with a towel or a sheet in it. The first day I wore my sister's hand-me-down coat, Isabel said, "That coat looks familiar. Don't I recognize that coat?" I looked at the ground. When the other children brought presents for the teacher at Christmas, embroidered silk handkerchiefs, and evening in Paris perfume, I brought dishcloths made into a doll. I read all the magazines that told me why blondes have more fun, described girls whose favorite color was blue. I hoped for a miracle that would turn my dark skin light, that would make me pale and blonde and beautiful. So I looked for a man with blonde hair and blue eyes who'd blend right in, who'd give me blonde, blue-eyed children who'd blend right in, and a name that would blend right in. And I'd be melted down to a shape and a color that would blend right in. Till one day, I guess I was 40 by then, I woke up cursing all those who taught me to hate my dark foreign self. And I said, here I am with my olive-toned skin and my Italian parents and my old poverty real as a scar on my forehead. And all the toys we couldn't buy, all the words I didn't say, all the downcast eyes and folded hands and remarks I didn't make rise up in me and explode onto paper like firecrackers, like meteors. And I celebrate my Italian-American self, rooted in this, my country, where all those black, brown, red, yellow, olive-skinned people soon will raise their voices and sing this new anthem. Here I am, and I'm strong, and my skin is warm in the sun, and my dark hair shines. And today I take back my name and wave it in their faces like a bright red flag. Thank you. I have to say that somebody, I won't say who it is, but someone said to me, why did you take back that name? It's so hard to say. And I said, because I really had to take it. It was a question of honoring all the things my parents taught us about what it means to give back to the world and to be in the world and to be human in the world. And what they couldn't give us in money, they gave us in an idea of how to live your life so that you're not just living for yourself and that you try to make the world a better place than it was when you arrived. And they were very strongly honored that. I'm going to finish with two poems. One is called My Father Worked the Third Shift. My father worked the third shift for 10 years before he retired from Royal Rubber Factory. He'd leave the plant at 7 a.m. and drive his old clunker of a Chevy from Patterson to Hawthorne, stopping on the way home on Sunday mornings to buy crumb buns because he knew he liked them. Once a friend told him he could get a better job, and he's left his job and tried out the new one, but he only lasted a week before he realized he couldn't drag that paralyzed leg through the heavy work of lifting 200-pound rolls of silk. When he went to ask for his old job back, the boss said, "Sorry, but I'll only take you back if it's as though you never worked here before. Start at a lower wage, no vacation or sick days, no pension." My father agreed because he had no choice. He went back to watching the gauges on steam boilers to make sure they didn't explode. My mother was furious. My father never carried a grudge. He wasn't in him. He wasn't even angry at his father, who deserted his family, my grandmother, and 7 children, and went to Argentina and never came back. "Oh, well," he said right before he died at 92. "We don't know what made him do that. Maybe he had a good reason." Once, my father was talking about the past on one of the nights that I went over to his house to sit with him after my mother died. And he told me about the time he was hurt on the job when a window fell on his back and he ended up in the hospital. The boss came to see him, and he was so thrilled that his boss took out time to visit him. But the boss had come to fire him for getting hurt on the job. My father was disappointed. His feelings were hurt. But then he said, "Oh, well, what can you do? It was long ago. It doesn't matter anymore." And I'm going to finish a poem with a poem about my husband, who, when he was dying, it was the same time as the BP oil spill. Watching the pelican die. On TV, I watched the pelican with its mouth wide open, its wings and body coated with oil. Is it screaming? I do not hear the sound, and since this is a photograph, I don't know whether it was caught in that mouth-stretched howl when it died, or is it howling in recognition that it cannot survive the thick coat of oil that bears it down. The ladies who take care of you when I'm gone tell me you were having trouble. His hands, they say, his hands. When I come home, I see your hands have turned black at the tips. And when I get closer, I see the ends of your fingers have been eaten away. I watch the dead bird on the Gulf floating on top of the water, its legs stiff and straight in the air, its body drained of all motion, all light. The next day, I take you to the doctor. He tells us he'll have to operate to remove the gangrenous flesh. The announcer on CNN says, "We didn't want the photographer to take pictures of the dying birds covered as they are with the black slick of oil. They were hoping," he says, "that the birds would sink and the evidence would be swallowed by the ocean." In the late afternoon, I hear my daughter cry out. I rush to see what's happened. You are stretched out on the bed. Your body's so thin, you look like a small boy. You do not move. I call 911. The ambulance takes you to the hospital. BP is trying to put a cap on the spewing oil rig. The CEO keeps saying it's no problem. Clumps of oil wash ashore and float on the surface of the water. The beach is littered with dead fish and birds. At the hospital, they want to know whether we want extraordinary measures. No, I say, he has a living will. Do you want a stomach tube? No, I say, no tube. We hover around while they admit you. You have forgotten how to speak. In my mind, I see that screaming bird, its mouth wide open, a picture of torment and despair. I reach out to hold your hand, stroke your forehead. Dennis, I call out, Dennis, you do not hear. The doctor comes in to see you. Well, he said, he should have been dead 5 years ago. What did you expect? You shouldn't have taken such good care of him. We did everything we could, the BP president says, looking directly at the camera. It's not such a calamity, the governor of Louisiana says. It's the president's fault anyway. We don't need to stop deep water drilling. Our economy will collapse if we do. We stand around your hospital bed. My brother comes in and says, I'll try a stronger antibiotic. It's bad, he says, but he waits until we're in the hall to tell me. The social worker tells me, you should put him in a nursing home. My brother says, you kept him home all this time. If he gets a little stronger, I'll let him go home, and he'll be around the things he knows. I love you, I whisper in your ear. The doctor comes in and says he's not going to make it. The social worker admonishes us with her bag of common sense. She does not love you. We take you home. I sit next to you and hold your hand. The MSNBC reporter stands on the beach in a hurricane and picks up a huge glob of oil with a stick. Look, she says, look, and drips the oil on the white sand. She's shaking with fury at such destruction. Dead birds float by behind her. I'm in pain, you say, though you have not complained before. I am in so much pain. Althea feeds you a jar of baby applesauce. You open your mouth and accept the food. When I see the pelican on TV with its mouth wide open in horror, I remember you as you lay dying. On the Gulf, the earth and the sea are being destroyed, just as you were by the disease that finally defeated you after you struggled against it all those years. Some things are bigger than all of us. We cannot defeat them. If there is enough carelessness and greed in the world, even the ocean can be destroyed. And you who fought against this illness with such courage, even you cannot survive. The blackened tips of your fingers, the oil heavy on the bird's feathers, the birds dead and floating on the surface that gradually sink and disappear.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the poets? Anybody like to pose a question? As you're thinking about what you might ask, I do want to let you know that on Friday we're having another poetry event. This is Big Poetry Event Week at Berkeley City College, and this is the birth of a poet, William Everson Centennial. William Everson, also known as Brother Antonius, he is a major figure of the San Francisco literary renaissance. He was a precursor to the Beats, a shamanic poet of the California landscape, a renowned hand press printer, and a prophet of erotic, earth-based spirituality, and the herald of environmental revolution. And this is a wonderful presentation that it has been organized by Cliff Ross, who has taught English here at Berkeley City College. There'll be presenters and poetry by Lorna D. Cervantes, Janet DeBar, David Fecho, Rafael Jesus Gonzalez, Maria Norbit, Corte, and Jim Powell right here. And there'll be music as well and a video. It's sponsored by the Tenderloin Reflections and the Educational Center, as well as Freedom Voices and the Milvia Street Journal. Free. Beautiful. I'll be here. So are there any questions you'd like to ask? It's at 7 to 9. No questions? Yes. Uh-huh.
I was just wondering who did that lovely artwork on the book.
An artist I know named Linda House. Isn't it gorgeous? It's just gorgeous. I love it. Although it's a very upper-class woman. So I felt a little guilty about that. But she does have books, which I always had in my hand. So I decided I could get away with the upper-class woman lying on something I always would have liked to have had, that kind of sofa, which I did not have. But it's beautiful, isn't it? I love it.
Yes.
And it's so bright. It's very cheerful.
Anything else? Well, let's just enjoy the rest of our evenings. There's biscotti and coffee and tea and books and people.
And they should feel free to come up and ask questions
Yes.
individually. 'Cause
Yeah.
sometimes people are hesitant to ask questions in
Yeah.
front of people. So if
Right.
you want to come up and ask questions of us individually, I'm sure we'd all be happy to.
Yes. And I also want to thank Laura Roberto, who snuck in here. She's there in the back. Laura. Laura was she made this event happen. She was the contact person, and as I was dog paddling all the 10 classes or however many I teach at a time, she was there answering emails, even as she was very, very busy with her own issues. So I just really want to thank Laura for putting up with me in my hectic life. And have a good evening.